Hi, welcome to a presentation of Africans in New Sweden, the Untold story. Today we'll be taking a look at New Sweden's best known African, Antoni Swart, better known as Black Anthony. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah Muhammad, and I will be giving you a look at the Swedish view of slavery and how this impacted the acquisition of Anthony from the island of St. Christopher. Swedish servitude was unlike servitude in the rest of Europe. For instance, slavery was outlawed in 1335, long before slavery was ever outlawed any other parts of Europe. But many Swedes, for the sake of profit, conspired, acquiesced, or willingly indulged in the transport, negotiations, and/or maintenance of slave dens until 1847, when all of Sweden and its territory, mostly their territories, ended that practice for good. Having a servant was customary in Swedish culture, unlike other places in Europe, but it was not considered the same as having a slave. There was a definitive distinction between a servant, forced labor, and slavery. Swedish ambitions were to start a colony. So, as other European countries were going into Africa, the Swedes decided to organize the Swedish African Company in 1649 for the purpose of trade and territorial acquisition. But unable to compete for slaves or territory on the African continent due to an inadequate naval force and too little experience with the conditions of the African continent, and also consumed by the demand of the 30 Years' War, Sweden lost its African holdings and its slave trade prospects, first to the Danish and then to the Dutch. It would be more than 125 years later before Sweden would try to profit from the Atlantic slave trade. However, not giving up its colonization ambitions, Swedish authorities decided to turn their attention to North America. Sweden's lack of a naval force and qualified ship captains made it necessary to turn to the service of Dutch captains and sailors. One such captain was Peter Minuit, who was an experienced officer with the Dutch West Indian Company and also a former director of the Dutch colony New Netherland in North America. Peter Minuit led the expedition to establish the first Swedish colony in North America called New Sweden, along with sailing vessels Kalmar and Vogel Grip. The expedition of sailors and soldiers left the port of Gothenburg, Sweden, in late 1637 and arrived at a place they call the Rock on March 29, 1638. A few months after arriving at the Rocks, Vogel Grip's captain, Adrian Jorison, left the colony with orders, and I might add specific orders, to travel to the Virginia colony to trade for tobacco. But instead, Captain Jorison decided to travel the waters of the West Indies in search of Spanish treasure. And according to official Swedish records, the only treasure Captain Jorison acquired was a lone African known as Antoni Swart. Was Anthony's arrival to the colony a matter of fate? Well, Antoni Swart, who became known simply as Anthony, had to have made quite an impression on the Grip's captain, because he was the only thing of value that was obtained in the West Indies to justify the unauthorized trip by its captain, as the excerpts from the letter illustrate. We know little about this expedition of the Grip years afterward. The skipper was accused of sailing about the West Indian waters looking for Spanish treasure, doing it all for his own benefit, and the only addition it brought to the colony's wealth that we discover was a Negro slave. New Sweden History, Royal Archive at Stockholm. After finding no Spanish treasure, the ship's cargo of furs intended for trade in Virginia had to be used to purchase Antony's freedom. Well, there's a conflict here, because it's also reported that the Grip was dispatched to Virginia to trade for tobacco. According to the ship's log and according to Swedish officials, Vogel Grip did arrive in Sweden with the tobacco that it was scheduled to trade for in Virginia. The pictures that you see on this slide ask the question, was Black Antony a possible stowaway? To justify why he was the only African brought from the island of St. Christopher. These pictures are from the movie Cloud Atlas, which depicts a scene where a lone African escaped from an island colony where he was enslaved. He stowed away on the ship because he was shown compassion by a key passenger aboard the ship and the fact that the ship had no slaves. Consequently, this could be a reasonable explanation for Antony being the only African brought from the island of St. Christopher aboard Vogel Grip. He was a stowaway who proved himself worthy, as the African in this story from Cloud Atlas had done. The question by many historians have been, was Antony Angolan or was he a Moor? As you can see from the map, the route taken by ships coming from Sweden and other ports in northern Europe made stops in the Canary, East Atlantic Islands, West Indies, Caribbean Islands, and the Spanish territory, which is now Florida. Most Africans brought to those same island stops came from Angola. However, looking like an African did not make someone Angolan. Very few, if any, Angolans had inbred sailing ability. However, many Moors who were populated the East Atlantic Islands did. In fact, most historians agree that Antony had inbred sailing ability, which were more common among Moors than with Angolans. According to sailing patterns during that period, slaves were brought from the East Atlantic islands of the Azores and Canaries, which had large populations of Moors. Antony had to stand out from other slaves because he was the only one selected. So we are led to believe. Living amongst the islands, the East Atlantic and West Indies, would certainly engender innate sailing abilities for someone like Antony. Were both these terms merely classifiers rather than identifiers? Why was Antony brought to New Sweden? What was expected of him? Most historians have recorded that he was brought here to establish a tobacco crop. However, documents show that he worked with the soldiers to build Fort Christina, the planting of tobacco fields, and in the fields at Prinshof with other Swedes. But his primary duty was that of being the skipper of the governor's sloop, the sailing vessel that was used during that time to navigate the rivers and creeks along the coastline. After Antony was brought to New Sweden, many questions arose. What were the conditions for his stay in the settlement? Historians have recorded that during his first few years, he had the status of an indentured servant. However, after Governor Prince's arrival, records show that he was a free man. What were his immediate duties and jobs prior to Governor Prince's arrival to the colony? As mentioned earlier, Antoni helped with the building of Fort Christina and the planting of tobacco fields, which were not very successful, by the way. Where and how did he live before his service to Governor Prince, after Governor Prince's departure? Well, we do know that prior to Governor Prince's arrival, Antoni lived among the soldiers and then amongst the other civilian settlers after April 1640. After Governor Prince's departure, he had his own living quarters on the estate of Prince House. However, records do not indicate how long he was able to maintain his residency after the Swedes were forced to surrender to the Dutch. One fact that is very well known is that Antoni's seafaring skills were truly needed by the colony, because the primary means of travel was on Delaware waterway. Another important fact was that good sailors were hard to find among Swedes, making Antoni even more valuable to the colony. But what became of Antoni after Swedish rule ended in the colony? And there are many factors that justify him leaving the colony no longer under Swedish leadership. First, the Dutch, then later the Swedes, made the colony a place of banishment for convicted felons. However, the Swedes stopped short of making it a penal colony long before the end of their rule. The Dutch increased their import of African slaves to the area, while the English moved from Virginia and Maryland farms to establish more farm areas along the fertile shoreline of what is now Delaware. Increased numbers of slave labor in the area had to have made it difficult for Antoni to travel freely as an African. Yet, there are no documents that support Antoni's departure to Sweden, which would have been a logical destination for Antoni, having lived among Swedes for such a long period of time. So questions have arisen, and they're still to be answered, but there are no answers. Was he kidnapped? Was he killed or did he die? Was he a stowaway on a friendly ship? Did he seek refuge with a local native tribe? Did he sail across the river to other Swedish communities on the eastern shore of the Delaware? Or did he move west with other Swedish settlers? During the time of the Dutch and the English coming to the area, many Swedish settlers moved along the Schuylkill River to the western parts of Pennsylvania, thereby establishing many new small villages and farm communities. I guess we'll have to wait and see what research discovers as to what happened to Antoni Swart after Swedish rule ended. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please stay safe and email any questions you may have to a.muhammad3@gmail.com. And don't forget your autographed copy of my book. Take care, stay safe. Until next time. Thank you for listening.